mentioned that you buy property just in Washington. Is that a deliberate choice? Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm not restricted to Washington. Like I said, I did, I did own in Memphis, and there
Hmm.
are other markets that I'm interested in.
Hmm.
However, there is some benefit to the consistency of laws and
Hmm.
LLCs,
Hmm.
and then one thing that I have not gotten into, I have had private money investors as debt investors, but
Hmm.
I've not yet done syndications on my
Oh,
own.
okay.
I feel very comfortable and confident to do it, and I've
Hmm.
got actually the team in place to get that going. It's just obviously,
Yeah.
now it's not a real good time to yeah, to
Yeah.
launch a syndication. But but at the same time, I also like that I understand everything, and if I work within everything within Washington, then
Hmm.
it just keeps things a lot simpler. And then also, frankly, even 5 hours is still reasonable in terms of a drive time. I mean, if I'm going to Memphis just to get there and back, you're talking about 2 days, really.
Yeah.
And so it just keeps things close enough. I like the general dynamics of Washington. It also lets me understand the market, the submarkets. I'm talking about at the town level, better, and also how they relate to others in the state. I mean, when you're looking at a whole bunch of markets all across the country, that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. And there are some that I do watch, but I understand the markets a lot better just because I can focus on them.
That's awesome, Scott. Thank you for sharing that wisdom in terms of investing locally. I do definitely agree with you because there's so much more research every time you kind of get into a new market. And then you have to kind of assemble a team. But you did mention that you did have a property outside the state. So it sounds like you have gone through the hustles or learning curve, essentially established teams outside the state. Tell us a little bit about how that worked. And it was a deliberate decision to kind of like bring it back to Washington, or is it just like, hey, it's the right time to sell and couldn't find another property there?
Yeah, it's interesting. We have a very in-depth property management interview process where we have a funnel. In other words, whatever's in Memphis,
Mm-hmm.
the 20 property management firms that are there, and
Mm-hmm.
funneling that down to the one that we chose.
Mm-hmm.
And it was it was interesting and surprising that in the end we made a mistake on who we
Mm-hmm.
chose. And I would say the key aspect in retrospect for them, where the source of the mistake was again, it was a 40 unit, and they had a good reputation, but they were really only good at 1 to 4 unit properties,
Mm.
and things that were, which I now know. I didn't know that at the time. They also, frankly, were very good salespeople, but
Yes.
in terms of better at marketing than follow through in some cases.
Yeah.
And anyhow, what happened there was they yeah, without getting into all the details, it was the worst property management experience I've ever had, and it was far away. Not that that's a reason not to go far away. I don't mean it. That was just this one particular case, but it was like, oh my gosh, and they were dishonest. They got to I bought it fully occupied. There were a few problem tenants, but fully occupied, and through their magic, they got it to 30% vacancy, 70% occupied. I'm like, oh wow, that's amazing how you can achieve that, and those numbers, and they were just they were just out of the league basically. So on the I knew, I could tell. I'm fairly good perceptive about working with people, and understanding when they're BSing me and things like that. And so I could tell that things were not as they were saying. So I got on a plane and went down there actually with the intention to fire them and to hire some others and interview some others. And the only reason I sold it was that the broker that I had purchased it through, we got together for lunch. I was in town, and he shows up with a folder, and he slides it across the desk, and he says, I know you're here to keep it and all that kind of stuff, but here's an offer. And
Nice.
it's a good offer where we can make some good money on it. And it was pretty simple, in other words, I didn't even have to restart and the whole deal. And if that offer hadn't come, I just would have restarted with a new property
New PM.
manager, and that wouldn't have been a problem. But
Yeah.
the main reason I got rid of it was just like this perfect convergence of,
Right.
make money on
How
it,
would you
easy,
not?
get
Yeah.
it done, go back to Washington.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that really kind of touch on when you're using contractor, et cetera, like that due diligence process was really important. Now, if you kind of think back to it, if there was a simple mistake, and I know you're kind of assistant process type of person, what did you tweak then in your funnel to kind of not repeat the same mistake again, potentially in the
Yeah,
future? Yeah.
on this, I've tweaked frequently throughout the years, and tweaked and improved, my processes. On this particular experience, two things I did. Number one, uh, using a higher sniff test on what is said versus reality. Again, to my comment about them being better at marketing than follow through, there were some things that I trusted, that they were telling me that was correct, that in terms of their capability, their background, that in reality became clear that they were not
Okay.
capable of doing. So that was one thing. And then the other thing is, I did do this some then, but I didn't do enough of it. And I
Mm,
do more of that now when I'm looking in a new market that I don't already have a good property manager in, is really looking at the other properties that they currently manage. And that's a couple things. Not only is it what they manage at a high level, like do they all do all singles, do they do all multifamily, do they have some office, whatever, but on top of that, uh, is to actually physically look at them. How are they maintained? Are the tenants happy? Are they getting turnover? Are the tenants being responded to? Things like that.
gotcha.
And do a little more boots on the ground research related to, not just what they say, but get
Mhm.
some independent confirmation of that,
Yeah.
at the properties.
Yeah, because I definitely had a mistake over that too. One of the property that we managed too was my PM. Same thing. The PMs always leads you because the difference thing is these companies, they have a marketing arm or the owner that is doing marketing, and then the actual person who is performing the task on ground.
Yes. Yeah.
And if they're smaller PM company too, that come across as also a little bit more difficult to kind of verify what they actually do.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
interesting because some of the big companies, I just had literally 2 months or month two 1 to 2 months ago, I had to fire a property manager, and they're a big company. And when I talked to the big cheese there, I just gave this list, just tum, 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 tum. We're not, we're not unreasonable, we're not high maintenance. And when I just gave this list of things, he couldn't debate it. It was just, and so I moved on to another company. And it's interesting, in that market, I have two multifamily complexes, and
Mm.
I specifically hired two different property managers to compare,
Oh,
and so I went with the
the
far
better
better
one.
one.
Yeah, kind of essentially a A/B testing a scenario over
Yes,
there.
exactly. I did that, and yeah, B
Yeah.
didn't do so well, so now they're both with A. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's good to know. Now tell us a little bit about, how kind of your daily routines look like, right? Like in terms of company process and et cetera. It sounds like actually going back to kind of company process and et cetera, just one last question is, um, when you kind of develop your business, obviously some of us are very organized like you are. I'm not organized. So, system and process is a little more difficult to kind of wrap our heads around. To you, what does system and process look like for rental? Like, let's just say you're not doing this full time because you have PM helping you doing that. What is kind of like that system and process look like for you?
For which I have systems and processes for all aspects, like, due diligence, finding a property management, new projects. So are you talking about property management side?
Actually, more so, that's great that you just said over there, because I want to kind of show our viewers, hey, you actually have system and processes over all spectrums of the operations over here,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, that's important.
And it probably took you a while to develop that.
Yes.
So how did you like started with that, and what's the first piece that you started developing the system process?
Let's see here. I would say, I mean, from the very beginning, because it's important. In other words, getting initial properties, I initially started working on processes for property selection, which is kind of obvious because you got to select a property to buy. But at the same time, I focused on due diligence, what kinds of properties would meet my criteria and my financial goals, and not just financial goals, lifestyle goals. I mean, they're intertwined, but at the same time, that it's kind of like my business model, where that is part of my lifestyle goals. It's not just a financial goal
Right,
of having, basically, quote, subcontractors, and I
right.
pay,
Yeah.
so yeah, so I first focused on that, and at the very beginning, when I was, quote, more book smart than experience smart, I really started looking for ways to filter out, because there's obviously a lot for sale.
Hmm.
You can
Hmm.
buy anything, so
Yeah,
buy whatever. It's just a matter of buying what's good. So
yeah,
focused on
yeah.
that first, and then after that, I focused on property management, and then I focused, meaning property management practices,
Hmm.
and then I focused on what I would say more the repairs and maintenance aspect of it.
Hmm.
And over time, I also got into other things about, okay, well, there's the long range cycle processes of,
Hmm.
when do I do a cash out refi? When do I
Mm,
invest more in this property versus not? What's the ROI on doing a remodel on that unit versus just leaving it as it is?
yeah,
Those kinds of things as well, but
yeah.
that's kind of a later on. So
Hmm.
I developed processes depending upon where I was early on,
Hmm.
moving through the overall real estate
Yeah.
acquisition and management and even disposition process.
That's awesome, because it's kind of life cycle of real estate. So you kind of just took upon, like, every time you're in the middle of doing something, you're like, hey, take a moment. Let's make sure that we write down some of the stuff that was important and
Yeah.
then improve upon them. That's a good
Yeah, like
advice.
to give you an example, because it tends to be more what I would say checklist driven than
Hmm.
other things. Our due diligence process, meaning when we're real serious about a
Hmm.
property, we've got a mega Excel spreadsheet, and the nice thing about, and different people, I'm not saying Excel, you can use whatever you want, but
Right.
we have this mega spreadsheet where, and it's all these different areas, and we even assign, we have one column that assigns owners between me and my wife, and status and all that, and it's different areas. And the nice thing is, of course, anything that's editable like that is, as we realize something new from experience,
Hmm.
we add it. And
Right.
then other things actually in some cases become optional, because they over time realize we can do very quickly or not as important, and things like that, so we can prioritize. But yeah,
Gotcha.
that
That
yeah
really
that
helps.
we also, like with property managers, we've developed our process, and especially after that one issue with Memphis,
Hmm.
we really got clear on our criteria. We have a set of questions that we ask at different stages of the process. And what I mean by that is, when we
Hmm.
start with the 20 at first, we might be just starting with some online research, and then we
Right.
finally get to the point of a telephone interview. We have a
Yeah.
certain set of questions, and then we have another set of questions and another set of things we look into when we get down to 3,
Mm-hmm.
and those are in-person, meetings,
Yeah.
and each of those has a different set of criteria and a different set of things we're looking for.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And and what is your kind of daily routine look like then? Like, let's say when you were back in the W-2 job,
Mhm.
what is it kind of like to have a side hustle essentially doing real estate? I would imagine at some point that real estate business start taking its own shape, require kind of more and more time, even though you're using the PM company. But as you have more unit, that kind of takes its own shapes a little bit. So how do you kind of juggle between the two? Is there a certain thing in the daily routine that really helps you with that? Um, to kind of
Mhm.
give us some insight into that.
Yeah, and for me, I'd say it was a bell curve of effort. And what I
Yeah.
mean by that is I started out with few properties and a job, so that's kind of the low end of the bell curve. And
Mm-hmm.
then I got more properties. So frankly, I'm not going to say that it was easy. There was a period of time there where I was not working 2 full-time jobs, but I had 1 full-time job and I had a part-time job in the evenings
Right.
and the weekends. But I had a goal, and
Mm-hmm.
I knew that I was going to push through that. For me personally, how I addressed that, and my wife was completely on
Mm-hmm.
board with it, because of our longer range vision
Mm-hmm.
board. So I've been full time only 2 years, but she has been full time in her business for I think 7 years, something
Okay.
like that.
Okay.
And so basically what we did was, we got to the point because of our rental properties of me saying, okay, well, of the 2 of us, I'm making more money at my W-2 job than she was,
Mm-hmm.
but we really need one of us to be putting more time into this. And she was
Mm-hmm.
completely happy to do that, because then what we were able to do was I found a job where I could generally work remotely, and then she
Mm-hmm.
could work from home. And part of our vision board was to move to Whidbey Island.
Right.
And there's not many tech companies on Whidbey Island, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So the combination of me being very specific on looking for a job that I could work remotely, and
Mm-hmm.
then
Mm-hmm.
her working on our business enabled us to do that. And
Right.
then just kept on the train of building the portfolio. And then finally I said, I would jump as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what helped as far as dealing with it. That helped a lot,
Right.
because then there was this big period where for the first 8 years it was just me,
Mm-hmm.
entirely. My
Mm-hmm.
wife wasn't really even that interested in it or anything like that.
Yeah.
But when it was in the context of how it could help us achieve our longer vision, she was completely on board, and then she jumped in.
Gotcha. So kind of getting your spouse spot in is a pretty important lesson over here. And that maybe started with a sharing a common vision that you
Mm-hmm.
come up with all that. And at some point, maybe it'll be 8 years that she's not interested in it. But at some point, she might be interested on taking some parts of it because the vision is kind of shared over there.
Yeah.
That's
Mm-hmm.
actually really helpful, because I know some of our viewers, this kind of really speaks to them in terms of, hey, how do I actually juggle between the two? Right over there.
Yeah, and I mean, and if you don't have, it's not like it's dependent upon, needing to have a spouse who's interested, because, you
Right.
may have a spouse who wants to keep their job, or they just, they think real
Hmm.
estate is not their thing or whatever.
Hmm.
It, it, uh, it doesn't come free, and, it does require work. And,
Right.
but if you can rely on others and build your team,
Hmm.
then at least I could work my 40-hour a week job and know that at least it could wait for me to check emails at night.
Right.
It
Right.
wasn't like
Right.
dependent on me. And that worked out fine. It was
Hmm.
just, it was more hours total than 40 hours,
Right.
but it worked out fine.
Right. Because you kind of, it's something that also you somewhat enjoy to do, and again supports your
Mm-hmm.
vision.
Yep.
Is kind of get you
Yep.
through it. So what is next? Now you have been kind of in retire mode. I know you have some more free times on your hand.
Mhm.
So, how does that kind of transition look like, and what's next for you? Um, yeah.
Yeah. The biggest thing that I'm my as far as for real estate, I'd say there's two things. I'm still looking, even though we'll take out this blip from coronavirus at the moment, but even
Yeah.
then, prices are still high. But
Yeah.
prices, the market has been a little too frothy and high to meet a lot of my criteria as far as wanting
Hmm.
to invest, because I'm a cash flow investor. So I I have adapted somewhat to that over the last 2 years. I'm still interested to buy. I want to
Hmm.
buy more, but I'm not going to buy things at a five cap or 4.5 cap or whatever
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
people are buying in Seattle. And so because of that, I've adjusted. I've actually gotten into some private money lending.
Hmm.
I've gotten into some coaching,
Okay.
and I've also gotten into investing in other people's deals in other states. And
Hmm.
so. In other words, when the pipeline to me was not as intriguing, then I
Hmm.
looked at three different new ways to adapt, at least temporarily.
Hmm.
Although my primary interest is still my original interest, which is to personally own
Right.
properties. But that allowed me to still make sure that my funds were deployed and making money and be involved with people and things like that.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I've done that, and I've been doing that over the past couple of years,
Hmm.
and I have. And I'm still actively looking to purchase more. I
Hmm.
also would like to start leveraging all this experience in terms of doing syndications. So
Hmm.
that's why I've set up my team by team I mean my accountant set up, my attorney set
Right.
up.
Right.
I know all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
To do syndication. So that's another thing. And
Yeah.
then when the times are a bit slow, kind of like they are now, I believe I'd mentioned to you,
Yeah.
I'm right now I'm actually creating a community sculpture park,
Right.
and that's been a lot of fun. It's almost been a job of its own. It takes a lot of time because it's
Right.
at this point it's just me, but I've had a couple people start to approach me about volunteering and things like that, and it'll be great. But it's been
Yeah.
just so far, but it's really neat, and it's one of the neat things that background with real estate. In terms of owning the land and
Hmm.
getting that, and working with contractors, and it's something that it's two loves of mine, which is nature and art, and
Hmm.
I'm combining the two of them and sharing it with the community. So it's pretty
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, that is very interesting, and definitely want to visit there
Yeah,
at some
yeah.
point for that. And so you mentioned about like coaching, etc. Now, for some of viewers, they may be very interested on like, oh, geez, like all these process that Scott's talked about. Is there some way that we could actually get them, or kind of use that as a kind of a blueprint to help us? So essentially, part of the investing in education is that you don't have to go the hard route, for that. So is there some way that they can kind of reach out to you? Tell us a little bit about the coaching stuff. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, the easiest way to find out a little bit about me is I have a small website. It's called bonvolo.com. That's Bravo Oscar November Victor Oscar Lima Oscar. Whoo, I got it. Uh, bonvolo.com. And there's a little coaching tab on there and a couple other things about us.
Hmm.
And that's probably the easiest way. And yeah, I'm I specifically have a very flexible model. And what I mean by that is most, I would say, coaching or guru programs are maybe a set amount, and some of them are extremely expensive.
Hmm.
And they might be you meet every 2 weeks or whatever. And instead, what I do is I just do hourly.
Hmm.
And if the student doesn't call me to need something, there are no hours spent, and in other words, it's completely driven by the
Yeah.
student as far as. And what I've found is I'd say the most popular approach,
Mhm.
so to speak, is some folks will do some coaching with me to kind of get them up to speed and get them on the right path. And then
Mhm.
I might not hear from them for a little while. And
Right.
then when they find a property, they may call me in to help them with due diligence and make sure it's a good deal.
Mhm.
And then it may not hear from them for a while. And then if they run into an issue on the property,
Right.
so it's purely needs based kind of thing. So
Right.
it's a different model than almost any other coach that I personally know of, but
Right.
it works well for me, and it keeps it real flexible. And because it's fun because I enjoy it, because
Mhm.
I'm sure you've heard that the best, in some ways, there's some expression about it, but basically the best way to learn is to be a teacher.
Right.
And because when I'm speaking to someone, I need to be very clear
Mhm.
on what I'm communicating to them, and I need to
Yeah.
make sure it's right.
Yeah.
And so it really solidifies what I'm doing for my own portfolio when
Mhm.
I teach others about it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's good to know. And then we will put the stuff underneath here,
Right.
on the on the website information as well. So switch gear a little bit, just kind of wrap it up our interview. Now I know you have children,
Mhm.
and so what are some, because we talked about before, but what are some? Can you share with the viewer what are some things that you are doing to kind of like purposely helping your children to get into a place to be more financially literate? What are some of the things that you discovered over there, or you've been kind of implementing to them that you think
Sure.
is going to have pretty good
Yeah.
impact?
So I
Yeah.
have one 10-year-old daughter, and
Yeah.
she's in the fourth grade,
Yeah.
and she is intrigued by some of the things that we're doing as a business.
Hmm.
When she talks about what she wants to be when she grows up, she does not say real estate investor yet,
Yeah.
but she could do something around animals or something or another. But and that's fine if that's what she wants to do. But the business aspect of it, she is interested. So in terms of encouraging that interest, several things. I initially started, I don't know, a number of years ago, by starting to introduce very basic concepts by doing things such as, number one, there's the cash flow for kids game based
Hmm.
on the Kiyosaki. There's cash flow game, which is for adults. I've actually never played
Right.
it, but apparently people like it. But there's a cash flow for kids game, and it just
Oh.
talks about the idea of assets and liabilities. And
Hmm.
when she was even younger, like I said, maybe 4 years ago, something like that, and it really started kind of getting that concept,
Hmm.
in her head. Then we also did, with the local economic development council, we did a lemonade stand.
Hmm.
And when we did that, we really treated it as a business.
Hmm.
And it was very interesting going through, because you get actually officially, if you do a lemonade stand like most kids do, it's actually illegal.
Yeah.
so,
Oh, wow.
so which is kind of funny, because there are these health issues, and you got to, I don't know,
Right.
got to wear gloves and all this kind of stuff. But the Economic Development Council had this program where each summer they got a special dispensation from the Washington Health Department.
Yeah.
But to do that, kids had to do certain things. So, and there were
Hmm.
certain processes we had to do. But from a business perspective, that was really good, because we talked about, it wasn't just if they got $1 for a drink. It wasn't just that, but it's the cost of goods sold, and how
Hmm.
is she going to get that money up front? And she got a loan
Right.
for us, and she paid us interest on that
Right.
loan. I mean, it was
Right. Wow.
cents,
Yeah.
but she actually paid interest, and we talked about that concept. And marketing, and how could you actually, and we actually did marketing, because
Yeah.
this was her, among other lemonade stands on Whidbey Island.
Yeah.
And so it's like, why are they going to come to
Competition.
our
Right.
stand versus other
Yeah.
stands? and
Yes.
and then how do you differentiate products? So we actually added a slushy to it. It wasn't just lemonade. You could get
Mm.
lemonade, or you get a slushy, and you could upsell, and it was very
Mm.
little extra cost in terms of the materials, or the, the cost of goods sold, but she could charge almost twice the price, so
Yeah.
those kinds of concepts,
Yeah.
we go through,
Very
and I
neat.
think they were very impactful, and they kind of,
Yeah.
stay with her. And
Yeah.
then we do, my wife and I will, we don't have meetings in front of her, because frankly she would probably, her eyes would glaze over and she'd get bored. But
Yeah.
at the same time, we do talk about our business in front of her. She
Mhm.
hears it, she gets it, in terms of by osmosis.
Right.
And as she gets older, we increasingly talk about new concepts. So,
Mhm.
what does financing mean, and
Mhm.
what do interest rates mean, and
Mhm.
how does quote passive income work, and how
Mhm.
passive is it really, and all those kinds of
Yeah.
things. And
Yeah.
so it's a gradual process. The big thing is we've made the active effort to keep it interesting
Mhm.
and not overwhelm, because the flip side, I mean, I would do even more, but
Right.
I want to make sure that she is interested to learn more, as opposed to me shoving
Right.
stuff down her throat because I want her to be some real estate mogul someday or something.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good advice over there. So last question, promise it is the last question. Um, what is your daily routine like? Because I think for a lot of people, especially people who has W-2 kind of switching into side gig, a lot of times always we complain about, oh, we don't have enough time, but often it's a prioritization issue.
Right.
So what kind of helps you, like one thing in your day that kind of anchors you? And do you have a daily routine? Kind of describe to us shortly what that maybe looking like. Yeah.
Yeah, I do, and that's part of that sheet that I showed you that is
Mhm.
related to
Mhm.
goals. There's a section in there about things that I want to do on a daily basis. In other words, they're not long-term goals. It's the goal is to do this consistently. It's not like some big
Right.
grandiose goal,
Right.
and frankly, I don't do everything every day, so
Mhm.
I'm not perfect on it,
Mhm.
and it's partly just to be flexible. It depends upon how busy I am and
Right.
priorities. I do, as far as the things that are on my list,
Mhm.
and again, I don't do everything every day, but I do exercise almost every day,
Mhm.
6 days a week. I exercise, and actually, before I go into my list, I should say I completely get it and understand that it is now easier for me to do these things than
Mhm.
before when I had a W-2 job.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the things I'm about to list, it probably would have been less likely to do, to be quite honest, to be
Mhm.
transparent, when
Mhm.
I had W-2. Now, so I have, let's see here. I've got exercise, meditation.
Mhm.
That's the one that I struggle with a little bit to do every day. I haven't
Mm.
drank the Kool-Aid entirely, even though so many people recommend it, that it's like, I keep doing it. I did it today,
Yeah.
and I keep at it, but
Yeah.
it's not like I look forward to my meditation every day.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I'm gonna do that.
Yeah.
I also think actively about the day.
Mhm.
Usually what I do the night before, is at the end of the day,
Mhm.
is I actually write out what are my top priorities related to my big life priorities that I plan to do the following day.
Mhm.
And that by itself, that's probably the most important thing,
Mhm.
because I actually have on this clipboard that I just showed you, I
Mhm.
actually have a list when I wake up in the morning of what I want to do that day and why they're important.
Mhm.
And that's my single most important one of all of them.
Mhm.
And then I also have other things in there that are um, kind of oriented, I would say, to spend a little bit of time on gratitude.
Mhm.
also spend a little bit of time on what some people call, like if you ever read the Miracle Morning or things
Mhm.
like that,
Yeah. Yeah.
the kind of like the affirmations and visualizations. I don't spend much time on that, but at the
Mhm.
same time, I do spend a little bit of time on it.
Yeah.
And um, to, there are other things too I do around diet, healthy diet and all this kind of stuff. But
Mhm.
that,
Mhm.
I'd say that's the bulk of the repeating things.
Mhm.
And as far as finding extra time, I'd say the two things I do the most is and actually the second one is almost a subset of the first one. I prioritize,
Mhm.
number one, and I mean that on a big global level. And then
Mhm.
number two, the thing that I'm really working on, I'm getting pretty good at it, but the thing I'm working on is in that prioritization, saying no to the
Mhm.
stuff.
Yeah.
And that a lot of people have difficulty with.
Right.
And it's interesting when people say they don't have time for things,
Mhm.
but it's the classic thing. How much time did you spend on Facebook today? How much
Yeah.
time did you spend watching TV today?
Mhm.
That kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And it's like, well, I mean, maybe you're a zombie from working, too hard at work or something. But
Yeah.
when I hear those things, or when people really admit them, I usually don't hear it
Yeah.
because people don't admit it. But if
Yeah.
you get down to it, a lot of people can find, some time if they really try.
Mhm. Mhm. I think it's okay that if you do have a business, you spend time on the Facebook for marketing purpose and etc. But it's kind of like a watching TV if you're just kind of doing social media.
Yeah.
They are designed. These apps are designed to be addictive. So
Yeah.
next thing you know, 2 hours
Well,
gone, and
yeah,
you should
well,
be in bed. Yeah.
if you're
Yeah.
spending time on Facebook for your business, you're
Mhm.
spending time for what all the other people are sitting there spending their time scrolling and stopping and
Right.
looking.
Right, right.
So,
Exactly. Yeah. So that's really great. Well, thank you so much for sharing so much information with us. And I really hope that we will have you come back, maybe integrate it in our community, because I definitely feel like there's a lot of good nuggets that you can potentially help our community of folks to kind of get to their next level as well. Um,
great.
yeah. Thank you so
Happy
much.
to participate. And it was fun talking to you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.